5. We'll also start with introductions. I'm Erin LaFramboise, Commission Chair from Browning.
Ken Wall from Missoula.
Elsie Aronson, Montana State Superintendent.
Bruce Gould, Helena.
Jamie Doggett, White Sulphur Springs.
Kenny Narlich, MSU Bozeman.
Ann Kish, Dillon, Montana.
Jenny Stapp, Montana State Librarian.
I'm Melissa Williams, State Library staff.
I'm McCall Flynn. I'm Governor Bullock's Education Policy Advisor.
Evan Hammer, State Library.
Tommy Lexman, Madison County U.S.
I want to take a moment to say a special welcome to McCall and ask if there's anything else you wanted to say this morning. McCall is with the Governor's office longer than in her current role, but in her current role for a couple of months. And we're so pleased that you're taking the time to come meet with the Commission.
Thanks. I'm really excited to be here. And like Jenny said, only a couple months on the job now, so looking forward to learning more. And if there's anything you all need, please let me know.
Money.
I just heard about your stairs.
Yes.
I just heard. First order of business.
That would be awesome. It's been a push. We've invited McCall to come back for your December meeting. So at that point, she'll have had a little bit longer time in her position and be able to speak a little bit more about some of the policy initiatives coming out of the Governor's office. But this is a great meeting for her to be at since we're going to be talking so much about work planning for the coming year.
McCall, are you primary to university, or is that your scope?
Yeah, so early childhood to workforce, actually.
Okay.
So juggling lots of different hats, but really enjoying it so far. And just getting my feet under me right as school's about to come back in session. So I'd say that's good timing.
Okay, well, we will reconvene. Again, thank you everybody, both in-house and online, for being patient with us and rolling with the changes we need to make to record our meeting. So we will move right into our approval of minutes.
Move minutes be approved.
Okay, any more discussion? All those in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Any opposed? And any abstentions? Okay, thank you. And if you recall, a few sessions ago, we were going to talk about our upcoming work plan. So,
I just included in your materials the FY19 Commission work plan for your reference.
and if you recall, the 3 items that came on our past work plan were put there specifically because of some of the restructuring, reorganization that we've done in the last 5 years. But I feel like we have either completed or the other 2 that are in yellow, which are kind of in hiatus, are being completed, not necessarily with us having to be the leaders in the completion with the reporting, and for some reason mine's not opening up, so.
Oh, shoot.
Okay.
I think working more effectively with MLA,
Yes.
what that might look like.
So we could potentially leave that on and put some different, try a different avenue on working more effectively with MLA. If we feel like we're doing okay with the reporting systems, and then with the State Library Trust, we are doing okay with the funding. Doesn't necessarily mean that that's our only avenue. So again, just to have you guys think about if we wanted to use these 3 pillars as where we want to continue to go, we can, or if they are things that we're ready to say we're done and go on to different work plan. It's open for discussion. Does anyone have anything they feel like the commission should be working on in the next year?
Well, in regard to the MLA plan, I'm not sure that we've formally done that, and I think it's our responsibility to do that. It says we're supposed to identify opportunities for roles and relationships. Having said that, I think we have, in effect, been doing that this year. I know I've collaborated with them on some presentations. They were part of a collaborative Hill visit. So there are all these little things going on in collaboration with MLA, but we don't necessarily have a master plan. I think we are just individually collaborating.
As need arises, rather than having a strategic collaboration.
Right, and maybe that's okay. And it doesn't need to be a formalized plan. But I don't know, I think we should talk about it, because we don't want to get back to the point, because I think we were at a point where there wasn't a lot of collaboration happening, and now it might be just based on individuals too, some in part who's in MLA, because that board changes all the time, we change too. I don't know. What do you guys think?
I think there's also opportunity. MLA will be getting a new executive director soon. That might be a good opportunity to build in some more strategic collaboration. Not saying that there was anything wrong with the current executive director. It's just an opportunity as someone new is learning the ropes to perhaps sit at the table and think about new ways that we can collaborate. So perhaps we leave the MLA collaboration on our work plan and then make those steps, working with the new director.
One thing I wonder, did you go to Shelby, or is it Shelby? What's the national broadband and
Shelby, Schools, Health, and
yeah.
Libraries Broadband Coalition.
I wonder. I keep hearing rumors of things going on and starting back up, and there's interest in improving the mapping and whatever. But I wonder if there's what's happening with that in terms of working with continued broadband. I don't know if that plays into the infrastructure grants that Aaron and Atlas mentioned the other day in an email out to the MEGIP group.
Suzanne Reimer will be attending their conference in October. She'll be presenting about the Gigabit Toolkit work that we'll talk about a little bit later in the meeting. But we could also have her come after that conference and talk about what's going on at a national level.
Because it's important in the next gen 911 thing too, because that's still one of the ways that people get into first tier priorities is working with, and there's a lot of telecommunications company involvement in that, real involvement, because they have similar needs. So it seems like it's always an issue, but something to put on the agenda to push more is broadband. And we don't have to rely on federal funding or subsidies necessarily as much as continue to improve that.
It seems to me the plan from last year talked generally about strategic partners, and be guided again this coming year by the same sort of junction to identify those strategic partners and prioritize them, and then actually assign commissioners where it's appropriate roles to take and work with those strategic partners. I think we need to get kind of that specific and perhaps that methodical about things. I mean, certainly MLA qualifies, and we always have NACO on the list, but it seems to me that we don't always identify what role that would be appropriate for commissioners to play in interfacing and just basically someone looking me in the eye and saying, Bruce, you were going to do this, is going to get more action from me than sort of a general statement that it would be nice to do this. So I guess if I would, I hope that the commission's able to do that. And I think that there's a couple different folks that to work on that. that there's some opportunities in regards to MLA and some of these strategic partners to also be cognizant of that we're going through there's an interim committee looking at state library funding, and there very well may be a role for individual commission members or the commission generally to take and work with that. And I would put that sort of at the highest level of priority personally in regards to funding, because clearly we can't keep on doing the same old thing and expect things to come out differently. So identifying partners and prioritizing and assigning, that's one. Tying ourselves to the work of the interim committee, as ourselves as a commission to the interim committee and working on that. The other thing is I was at the Network Advisory Council, and which was great, and I hope, well, I have a chance to talk about that later.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things I saw with that is that while there wasn't any resistance, any like heels in the ground resistance to the idea, it's a complicated, the assumptions and the whys and wherefores that went into the making of that were complex enough that it seemed to me that folks, librarians at that meeting, were struggling to get a hold of some of the concepts.
You're talking about the resolution
I'm
specifically.
sorry, yes. Yeah, sorry. See, I leave out whole nouns.
Yeah.
So it seems to me that that we're going to need to do some careful tending with various people who are affected by the fair use resolution to kind of talk about that and get it more generally understood, and that by the act of our passing that resolution at our last meeting, it isn't automatically going to have effect, that we need to kind of somehow help the library community make that real, and our partners experience making that real, and that's going to take some work. So I would make the fair use resolution one of my 3 sort of top priorities for this coming year.
I was going to add specifically about the resolution, if I may, that I think using that as the construct for communication from the commission level to MLA is appropriate. I think attending a board meeting of MLA, assigning a commissioner to do that, and to have a conversation about how we see implementing that resolution. That was a resolution for us. It was the vision for our agency. We can't say that it was the vision for MLA or the library community, but where there is synergy, finding ways that we can work together under the goals of that vision. And I would also like some of you, I've talked to Ken and Bruce about attending an MLIAC meeting to talk about the resolution. We can talk in the future about whether or not it's appropriate to talk to the Maggot board about the resolution, but begin to, as we identify and work with our partners, use that vision as the context that we're engaging with them. Did I interrupt you, Elsie?
So what is the process for adopting sort of key points for the coming, our coming year work plan?
Well, I think we should, we'll have to put it in the framework that we have. I'm trying to think, what would we have to adopt it next, the next session?
I think so. Bring it back.
Mm-hmm.
Let you guys talk a little bit more about it at your next meeting.
And so perhaps having, 2, potentially 3 people who are working on reorganizing our document with the strategic framework, or with the resolution, what the inputs, outputs, expected outcomes, and impacts may be. So I'm not sure if there's anyone who would like to volunteer for that, or...
Would it be helpful to take and put the proposal for the work plan in the form of a motion?
I don't know if we have to make
Whatever
a
would be most
motion.
helpful.
I think we can just create the working group to build the work plan, and then we will continue discussion and make some action on at our next meeting in October.
But I volunteer to be on that group.
Okay.
If there's a general sense amongst commissioners that those 3 points make sense to you. So it was continue to work on the fair use, talking about fair use resolution with our communities, focusing on the legislative interim funding committee for the state library, and identifying and prioritizing strategic partners. Is that generally acceptable?
And as a commission, do you think those three things are doable for us to accomplish in a year?
You'll be glad to know that all of those are also on staff work plans, so.
Are they?
Not dissimilar.
What, can I ask, what's going to define a strategic partner? What kind of people are we looking for?
People whose support or lack of opposition are critical to our success.
Kenning, part of what we'll be talking about in a little while is our work plan, and one of the things that we feel like we need to do is define the ways we partner with different kinds of organizations so we can evaluate whether or not they're strategic partners or just more ad hoc partners. Yep.
So Jenny, as you had said, that staff is also having those 3 bullet points, not to duplicate but to strengthen. Is there a way then that we can do that not in a more lofty look, but more strategic? Because if the work is going to be done with staff at the meetings and then bringing things forward, I'm just looking at the interim committee specifically. Is there a way then that we can more clearly define the role of a volunteer from the commission who would like to do this work?
So, for example, I would appreciate having a couple of commissioners working with us as we're building our work plan, those identified areas, making sure that as we're creating the logic models, that we're including those commissioners in developing that logic model and proposing the appropriate work for commissioners to achieve those goals, so that there's interrelated work plans. Does that make sense?
Of course.
Yeah.
Of course. I'll volunteer.
Great. And you have elections later in the agenda, but I would suggest maybe the chair or vice chair also.
I would think that would be entirely appropriate.
Another thought. It's gone. Oh, I'm sorry. Ken's point about broadband, and having that be a separate additional work plan item, evaluating broadband opportunities and the changing state and federal landscapes.
I think it could be its own, as well as a something that we look at building into each of those strategic partners, library funding, and the resolution. Because I think broadband currently is the overarching goal that we're really trying to level the playing field in Montana. So I think
That makes more sense, I think.
yeah, I don't know. So would it make more sense to have broadband its own bullet point, or underneath each of the 3 that we've
I
already
think
identified?
underneath each of the 3 would be my preference.
Okay.
Good.
Is it achievable in 1 year?
I think moving the discussion forward is, at this point, all we can do.
Yeah.
But by making sure that it's in everything we're thinking about, how do we keep that discussion alive and moving forward? So,
And just to remember that the EPP process will be in front of us in a few months. And, we've had EPP requests in the past to look at broadband, and we can bring those out again.
I don't think it is achievable in 1 year. I think that's the consensus. But maybe with this task force or committee, we could identify elements that will be achieved, so there's some accountability to completing something towards these longer-term goals.
Good.
and before we do our voting later on, does everyone think that perhaps the chair or vice chair should also be on this working group? Okay. So moving forward, we'll have Bruce, Elsie, and the new chair on the work plan working group. I say if you guys are at a point where you just need some input, don't be afraid to kick that out to the rest of us. Because I think it would be good to have something we can actually take action on at our next meeting.
Good.
Erin, for the next meeting, is your vision like having an updated work plan?
Yes.
Okay.
And
In the same format with the inputs, outputs, outcomes?
Yes.
Okay.
well, thank you guys so much. I think at the beginning of a meeting, that's often some of the harder work to do. But if there's no more discussion about the work plan or the working group, we'll move on.
Could I ask something of one of our guests? Would that be appropriate? Does any of those priorities, do any of those programs clash with what the governor's office is kind of thinking about?
No, and as you guys are talking about broadband, we in the governor's office partner with a group called Education Superhighway to get broadband out to different locations across the state that may not have it, particularly in schools, but it also does help the rest of the communities. With work that we're doing with them, I could certainly loop Jenny or any of you if you'd like to be looped in on their working group to kind of hear about some of the work they're doing, and if it's help to this committee.
I have been involved in the past. It would be helpful to get re-engaged.
Yeah, I'd be happy to do that.
Thanks, McCall.
Cool.
Okay, well, we'll move on to the State Library
Thank you.
report and work plan discussion.
So just really briefly, in your meeting materials, we have the updated equal opportunity plan that's required from the agency and our workforce utilization analysis that looks at equal employment opportunities and how we're doing relative to the employees and employment in this agency. So if you have any questions about those documents, you can let me or Melissa know. The other, just
Could you provide like a 3-sentence description of how we're doing? I didn't understand looking at the numbers
Yeah.
and stuff, if this is good or bad numbers.
So, I hate this phrase, but in my mind, it is what it is. We have a leadership team now of 3. We have 2 women, one man on that leadership team. So the report would rank us high in that regard. We have 3 administrative assistants. We hired a man as an administrative assistant. That ranked us slightly lower because those are typically seen as employment opportunities for women. I completely disagree with that analysis. So I just take this report for what it is. I feel like as an agency, we have a relatively equal cross-section of men and women in the agency. We have some ethnic minorities. We don't have an agency of the size that would necessarily strive to seek out minorities for specific work. We're glad and happy to hire minorities when they are the best candidate for the position. But given the size of our agency, I don't think we have the opportunities to strategically seek out minorities, with the exception of Native Americans. We don't have any Native Americans on staff, and that's something that we have talked about. We don't, for example, were we to have a program that focused on library services to tribes, we might try to hire a Native American into that kind of position.
So, no cause for any severe heartburn, but still some opportunity for, if the opportunities present themselves, for making a more fair representation of Hannah, her staff. Thank you.
So let's dive in and talk about the state library's work planning, and I wanted to start by talking about the efforts that we're making to flatten the organization. We talked about this at your last meeting, and we have now a draft organizational chart that we've shared with staff for their reaction, and I want to share it with you for your reaction. You can see that we have done away with the statewide library resources division and the digital library division. We still have staff identified in work groups that we refer to as user services, information management, and information products. Those should sound familiar because they were the work units within the digital library before we flattened the organization. And so we have staff organized into those work groups. We still have lead staff that supervise other staff with direct reports to Melissa and Evan and myself. We represent the Land and Network Advisory Councils and the NRIS Advisory Council sort of as foundational to the work that we do in how they advise the staff, the state librarian, and ultimately the commission. And then to try to sort of better encapsulate the vision for how these teams work together, we have what I lovingly refer to as our hippy-dippy org chart. And the key point that I want to make here is that there are no boundaries, and what we keep trying to tell staff is that the intent of encouraging people to work together is to look for opportunities to go beyond their program boundaries or go beyond their work unit boundaries. And so we're blurring user services and information management and information products. That said, it is helpful for staff to understand where they fit within the organizational structure. So having this kind of document, some staff are comfortable with the more fluid org chart. Other staff are more comfortable with the more structured nature of the more hierarchical org chart. And so we're trying to represent the work of the agency in both of those ways. And then just to walk you through this idea of cross-functional teams. I know this is probably a little bit small, but you can see it's linked from your our meeting materials.
Yeah. So I apologize. Just wanted to know if this is draft or if this is something that is already up and
It's
working.
in the commission meeting materials. It has not been
It has not
posted,
been posted.
as the official agency
Okay.
organizational chart. Yeah, yeah. But you can we've identified those project areas where we have certain staff responsibilities, where lead work would occur in a different program area. Also recognizing that there is overlap in the work. We have staff who, for example, who are managing collections of information in information management and then working with our user services staff to use that information to develop programming or to do training. For example, Erin Fashaway and Jessica Edwards and Amelia Kim have been going out and doing training in libraries on use of our GIS services and our GIS collections. Scrolling down just a little bit more, this gives you an idea of the cross-functional teams that are involved in administering the Montana Shared Catalog, with Tracy and the consultants working with libraries to encourage them and their boards to think about joining the shared catalog, understanding the opportunities and constraints in libraries that might prevent them from joining or help them think about joining the shared catalog. We have Kara as our consortia administrator, understanding how the shared catalog relates to the other consortial activities of and a shared catalog. And then we have the actual system administration and IT support staff supporting the agency. And by thinking about the system administrators working more closely with our other information product staff, it creates more opportunities for dialogue and discussion that can help us find opportunities for efficiency and deepen our bench as we support these kinds of important programs. And I've just provided a few more examples of what these kinds of cross-functional teams might look like.
So Jenny, you said that the staff have seen this.
Yes.
Has there been any reaction? Any comments?
Generally positive. I don't think I've heard any negative. We had one staff who got really excited and tried to use this kind of model to think about how we also prioritize our work planning. So, yeah, so it was interesting.
I like this because it, rather than being in silos, we're all in it together.
Mm-hmm.
And it, each different circle brings everyone together. And that's going to make more efficiency and better understanding of each other's work.
That's our hope.
I like this.
And I'm all in favor for a couple of reasons. And first of all, I think it's the state librarian's prerogative to organize the staff as she wishes, and I think that's great. I also think it's for the reasons that Jamie said. I think it's an exciting thing. There are a couple inherent points of failure built into this kind of system, to be blunt. And one of them is without the traditional hierarchical schedule or structure, it both appears to staff, I assume, and probably is in fact, there are fewer opportunities for advancement along traditional lines. And I assume that most of the people here at the State Library aren't working here because they want to be millionaires. But we have such qualified people, and being able to keep them happy, I think is important. So I think that's a potential weak point. The other weak point is, frankly, the state librarian is in the middle of all of it. And if something were to happen to the state librarian, like she became distracted by a legislative session or something like that, other things could fail. And I don't doubt your ability to do it. I just think that it is a potential point. My only request would be that you as state librarian and the board chair, your monthly meetings, have a long talk about how this is working, and if there's anything the commission can do in terms of looking at resources or something to take and patch up any rough points, I think we should jump on those. I think this is ambitious, but exciting. But I think we should do everything we can to make it tough. I mean, not tough in terms of hard, but resilient. I think we should try to bake in anything we can do to help make this successful. And would request that on a sort of frequent basis we hear how it's going.
Sure.
I think it's, I mean, can't wait to see how it works. But I think it's a little scary too.
I'm cognizant of the workload and what it's going to mean for staff, and we are actively talking about, and we'll talk about this a little bit more in once we get to the work priorities, the gaps in our resources. And staff are very much aware of the need to prioritize our workload. I'm aware of the need to prioritize my own workload to make sure that we're not stretched thin. We have never had a deep bench, and we've not had a lot of opportunity for advancement. The fact that we have leads now throughout the agency is intended to create more opportunities for people to develop their supervisory and leadership skills and have some opportunity for advancement. We have eliminated one management level position in this structure.
What's RTN?
The real-time network.
Oh, okay.
Good question.
So the Russian television network.
Yeah.
So Jenny, if you'll go back up to the Montana State Library one, visually thinking about how you are part of everything, I'm not quite sure how it would work, but if there were a way to have your line kind of along the outside and be dipping into every single piece of that. Though I do like it being in the larger circle, I was just thinking, how can we show that you are involved in every single one other than encapsulating them all under you?
Yeah. And in fairness, I would say that Evan is also involved in these. Melissa is also involved in these.
Actually, that was kind of an intentional, the group at the top, all of those are supported across the agency.
Everything.
So,
Yeah.
so that doesn't, I'm not saying that we do a good job of representing that
Yeah.
here, but we're
Yeah.
trying for that.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's good. So,
Yeah.
it occurs to me that maybe having them at the bottom, since we have support
Yeah.
all the agency work, might
Yeah.
be a subtle a symbolism that
Yeah.
we could add in. There's a lot of symbolism.
Yeah.
But I really like this because, you know, I think part of the problem with silos we addressed in some of the reorganization several years ago, and then, you know, the digital library had most of the fallout from the budget shortfalls. So this way it shows that we're all in this together, and it doesn't look like only one department is being affected by things that may affect everybody. And so I really like this more than the hierarchical structure, just because it does show that in this small organization, everybody has a little bit of a hand in every aspect of the library. Creates a more cohesive staff, I think.
I would add one other
Yeah.
thing. I totally agree with you, Bruce. Just as far as there are shortcomings of this model, and we're aware of that. We don't look at this as, oh, we were doing it wrong before, and this is the right way.
No, certainly
That
not.
there are just different ways to approach it. Similarly, there were problems with the hierarchical structure. It is very helpful for that clear lines of authority, but it didn't really represent a lot of the actual work that's been going on here over the last few years, and a lot of the work we want to encourage to happen. So, I agree with it. And it is very important to always note the shortcomings of the approach.
Yeah.
You understand that I'm really supportive of it.
Yep.
I just think that want to make sure it succeeds.
One of the other things that we're also working to address is the fact that none of us have ever managed a flattened organizational structure. I think the biggest or the most questions that we get from staff are just around communication and wanting to find ways to better communicate with one another. We'll talk about that a little more in the work plan goals. We have reached out and met with a consultant trying to get some guidance on mentors or other kinds of experts who have more experience working in a more flattened organizational structure. We haven't hit upon someone yet who we really think meets our needs, but that's something that we're actively seeking out as well.
Is the organization really flattened, or is it just represented in this in a more flattened way? Is it just a visual flattening?
What you'll see when we get to our work plan priorities, that there are actual work objectives where we have staff actively working with one another across the agency, where there will be leads assigned to different work projects that involve staff from the different work units.
And I think the flattening is represented two ways. One is that there is a level of management that is gone, so that shrinks it in that sense. The other is kind of to what Jenny's saying. And something we didn't emphasize in the response on the leadership opportunities. Yes, there are leads across. There are more leads in this model, but also any staff is encouraged to take leadership on various projects. So that is not constrained to leads. The leads are more focusing on certain areas and or supervision. I think that adds a level of flatness.
And the only thing about this model, if you go to the traditional model, the things that are missing are the governor and the commission.
Yep.
The word community never appears in any of this. It was a really important part of our discussion on the strategic plan, and I kind of wonder. I mean, government information is one thing, but that's probably the biggest place where community comes in. Aaron and I went to the economic development meeting after it was after NACO or something, and it struck me how, from a jazz perspective, how little awareness they had in that. And I just through my business, I've been working with Stevensville, who has a ton of issues this year. If you've read any news about it, but they, they had a small economic development grant, and they're getting really excited now because they're starting to see how like their water system failed and all kinds of things like that. And so there's an important part with the business community and others that isn't just government, that's part of community. It seems like that needs to be.
Let me ask a question, make sure I understand, and maybe the answer is both. Do you mean that in the org chart itself, we identify that our services are for Montana and its communities, or that in the work we need to emphasize our engagement with communities?
I'm thinking more in the work.
Okay.
I mean, it's broken like at the top at the administration level, it's the information management is broken into land, water, and government.
Yeah.
And I see the government perhaps being a broader community focus instead of just government. I mean,
you're reading our minds. I think we'll get into that discussion when we get into the actual work plan priorities.
Okay.
Just to put onto that, with the hexagons at the bottom that show, it says informational products, but isn't that also the partnership look? So putting more of that community into the partnership with the hexagons at the bottom show there's a connectiveness.
That's a good point.
Mm-hmm.
And it's interesting that you've got polygon versus a circle, a sphere. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
In your representation.
That,
I don't remember how that came about.
Yeah.
I think it's a holdover from our old one, is what it is.
Yeah. There is no intention there of, I realize there is a proximity thing
Yeah.
with info products, but that was not intentional.
Yeah. This definitely, I mean, we would benefit from a graphic designer taking a look at this, a graphic artist.
Great start. Great start.
Yeah, absolutely.
It applies kind of to the Venn diagram thing too, where at least under administration, I don't know if those are implicitly more into the cross-functional stuff. Yeah, I mean that's another kind of logical thing that would be. I wasn't sure whether it was just a backdrop or had a functional component.
That's
to
the
it.
hippie part.
That's the hippy dippy part.
It's the lack of graphic design skills. Evan was the one that helped me blur it, and the rest of it was just.
Yeah, the main focus we had here was showing the overlap in the different groups and taking away the hard boundaries of those circles and softening them to show that we're not looking at boundaries here, we're looking at opportunities for sharing process.
Great idea.
Yeah.
One of the things that, and I like the reporting part with Tableau, but there's also, I was talking to Elsie a little bit when we were getting started about the link story maps, which is a really powerful tool to look at sort of functional linkages as well as, the example that Ezra uses is the mafia or something, so it's more of a hierarchical model, but it...
my maiden name was Guidi,
But it's an interesting tool that could help with this process, I think. Are the cross-functional teams kind of fluid? Or are they, some of them are kind of almost envisioned to be sort of permanent, and others are...
I think the fluidity comes in the work and the achieving the outcomes of the work identified.
Mm-hmm.
So they are intended to be fluid. Some of them will have some of the work will of course be ongoing, and some of it will be time bound.
A lot of that is kind of to be determined, as you'll see when we get into the work plan stuff. The other thing that you'll see both as we talk about work plan, but also here with staff and some of the roles. We're not just saying that these are fuzzy lines. We recognize both in work tasks and in some of those positions that you could look at some of these, or many of these, and scrutinize and say, well, don't they do a lot of information management? Why are they in information products? And we know that, and we've tried to put them where they seem most likely, but there are definitely some of these where it's 50. You could put them in one or the other. And so we're going with this. And, but as we again, as we work through work plan items and things like that, it's possible that we realize that we need to swap some roles and do groups.
This reminds me of that aphorism, the map is not the terrain.
Mm-hmm. Yes.
I like that.
Yeah. Well, thank you for your feedback. I'm cognizant of time, so I want to briefly give you a look at some documents that we've been working on with staff. I'm going to start with, I think it's that one. Oh, okay. Let's see here. Did something.
You get to stop sharing at the top of the screen.
Yeah.
By the way,
it
this is so much a more pleasant screen to look at than the one that jiggled all the time.
Thank
This is
you.
terrific. Thank you.
Let's see if I can get it back.
It's called a wall.
Yeah, I was gonna make a point of talking about the investment that we've made in the technology in this room before the sound went to heck.
Hope you're all impressed.
Yeah, exactly.
How short the focus, the focal length is on that lens. How did they keep everything rectangular and stuff, rectilinear? It's a miracle.
Yeah, we worked closely with SITSD and
I
General
wouldn't go that
Services
far.
to come up with the model.
I wouldn't go that far.
Well,
All right.
It's just adjusting keystoning.
well, I know, but it's an impressive job.
So we spent all day last Wednesday doing work planning with all of the staff, and one of the things we started off talking about before getting into specific work plan priorities was some more descriptive information about these different work groups, user services, information management, and information products. Again, this was something that originally came out of the digital library, and now we're applying to the broader agency. And so we had staff from the different work groups sit down together and put some more definition around what these work groups focus on in more of a day-to-day basis. One of the things that you'll note in the work plan, and you'll remember from previous work plans, is we don't always talk a lot about the day-to-day work of the agency. We want the commission to be apprised of those work priorities that are our special projects and unique efforts of the agency. But we also want to capture some of the day-to-day work. When the information products team sat down to look at the work that they did, they had a document in front of them that was previously prepared by the team under just the digital library, and now we were including the staff from the Montana Shared Catalog. And they looked at it and said, well, if we just broaden the language and take out specific applications like the Digital Atlas or Cadastral and just say applications, that's what we do too. And so that's what they did. They actually sort of shortened the document a little bit and had it be more reflective of the number of applications and other kinds of services that the staff are providing. User services went a little bit different way. They grew the list, but ultimately we found that there's a lot of commonality in the kinds of work that they're doing, although they serve different audiences. So we didn't necessarily want to delineate all of those specific audiences, but focus on the fact that this group is the public face of the agency. They're the ones who work with our patrons most directly. They're the ones who work with libraries most directly. Excuse me. They coordinate our outreach. They coordinate products and services to meet our partners' needs, and they support different kinds of statewide collaboration. And then there's one for central services, and there's one for information management as well. And again, I'm cognizant of time, so we weren't planning on spending a lot of time on these documents unless that's of interest to you.
And so this is a work in progress.
It's still draft. We need to share them back with staff.
And this might be something we're seeing at our next meeting.
Okay. Oh, good.
Yeah, two quick things I'll add is just, as Jeannie said, we did this back when we did the reorganization of the digital library. I thought it was really good to work through, as any time that you're changing your structure, that creates some fear for staff because they don't know what that means for their jobs. And so doing this, I think, was a good opportunity to send the message to them. I want you to tell me what your responsibilities are. I'm not changing your job. We still want you to continue to do your work, but show us how it fits in. And it also helps them understand each other as a team and more broadly because they see each other's responsibilities. One of the first things that came out of that at the time, again, was, well, we have this, but they have this. And then that opportunity for education as far as we recognize that. We know that you both work on our website and web administration. This is an important part of all of us recognizing that it's not just one person's job or one group's job. We're going to have to work together on these kinds of things. So I think this is a great place for bringing out some of that overlap and ensuring that we're working with each other on those kinds of things. But then, as Ginny said, this is a work in progress. They've worked on updating these. We've done a quick round of reviewing them. I think last time it took a couple of months to finalize these, but they're never really finalized.
Yeah. Yeah. So very quickly, and then I want to get into the meat of the work plan priorities. I appreciate your flexibility as we talk about work plan priorities and how they align with our budget. So we will send out, I'll look back at the doodle poll and send out a date that works for everybody to have a shorter meeting that's focused specifically on the financial report on the budget. This is very drafty, so I don't want you to look at the numbers. But what I want you to see is that when we present a final budget to you, it's going to be, we're going to have the ability to organize the budget around these projects. And many of these projects will tie directly to work plan priorities. One of our goals in how we restructure the budget is to answer the question that many of you had when we were going through the budget cuts. What does X cost? What does it cost to provide this service or this program? And this kind of budgeting is going to take a huge step forward for us to be able to answer that question. There's more reporting, especially around staff time, and other ways that we break out this kind of project reporting, especially when a project might have multiple funding sources, for example. But I'm very excited to be able to understand from a cost perspective what the different programs and services are. When we talk about the interim study, that's one of the questions that we're going to be asked. So we are going to be much better prepared to be able to answer some of those kinds of questions. And then the other thing you'll see about this budget is that it's not organized by division. It's organized by projects that are reflective of the entire agency. And this is the first time that I know of that we've taken a look at the entire agency's priorities, and we are literally building a budget from the bottom up and looking at all of our funding sources and the statutory language tied to those funding sources, making sure we're using the funding appropriately, but also really collaboratively around the agency priorities. And I'm really excited about that.
Is it harder to plug heritage into this kind of a framework?
No.
Be easier, actually, wouldn't it?
It's just the same. I mean, it's just the same.
Yeah.
Yeah.
So not to deviate, but to talk
Yeah.
about budget. So House Bill 715 had to do with the study that was going to be very longitudinal, 20-year back, 10-year forward, discussing House Bill 2, all the funding component.
Yep.
So has fiscal come and visited with you about what that overlay would be?
We've had one conversation with fiscal, yes, and that will be tied into the House Bill 633 study as well. So they'll be working directly with Melissa to do that look back and look forward, and then information from that study will also inform the House Bill 633 study. Yep,
All
exactly.
intertwined.
Yes, exactly, all intertwined. I have way too many documents open here, folks. This is let's see, not what I wanted. So I'm very excited to be able to present this budget to you in the next couple weeks, so you can see what it looks like and how it aligns with our work plan priorities.
How do you integrate something like, accessibility or things like that that are kind of across all aspects of it? I was kind of struck how much discussion there was at I don't go to the ESRI user conference very often, but I went this year. They're really making a bigger effort to try to make, it's difficult to make, visual things like maps more accessible, but they're really trying to integrate that more and provide more continuity. Does that get lost in the shuffle with this when it gets across all of it? Or?
That particular component, maybe. I mean, we don't have a line item that's for accessibility. We do
Right.
have a line item that's for indirect costs, and we're applying those kinds of indirect costs and efforts that support the entire agency to that specific category. So to tease out that component would probably, unless we were directed to say, I want to know how much you're spending on improving accessibility,
Yeah.
then we could create a project and tie staff work time. If they're going to training or creating web templates or doing work with mapping, we could tie that in. All right, how do I get out of this?
So, separate from budget, historically, our primary kind of addressing the accessibility was talking about supervisor on our web oversight, primarily for web accessibility. Now, accessibility is highlighted in user services responsibilities under their web responsibilities, and I believe there's also some accessibility points in the actual work plan items. But
So let's talk about some of the actual work plan priorities and give you a sense of where we think we're going. We have these organized, right now we have them organized by status. So whether they're in progress or work that's in planning or pre-planning. Some of these projects are ongoing from last year, some of them are new. And when we were doing this kind of work with all of the staff, again, we had all of the staff together talking about the different priorities. We just alphabetized the priorities because we didn't want to give any specific weight to any one person or one work group's work priorities, because that's not how we're viewing this. We're viewing, again, these are the priorities of the agency. We're evaluating the resources necessary to complete this work. If we feel like we don't have the resources necessary, we'll consider that and have to take some work off people's plates. But right now, with the input from staff, this feels like a fairly doable work plan for the agency.
And these were kind of the things that came out of that meeting. We haven't done a lot of, haven't made a lot of effort towards cleaning up at this point. So there may be some things that you see that seem like they may be redundant or related, and they may not necessarily show up next to each other right now. But that'll be a next phase of this, and as we work through there. But again, we felt like the status was really important because if it's already happening and going on, we don't want to not consider that when we're comparing it to something that is a conceptual item or something that's in a pre-planning stage.
Did I miss this in our packet?
No. Yep. So, again, this was developed with discussion with staff last week. We'll go through these items and talk about them with you so you have an understanding of what they are, and take any feedback from you. We have a follow-up all-staff meeting next Wednesday to go back to the staff and share any reaction from you. And then we go into the work of creating the logic models so you see a fully formed plan at your next meeting. And that's where we can have the crossover work with the commission on your specific work objectives.
You know, for all of our discussion over the last 3 or 4 years about reporting, seems to me that this simple little table here goes further than anything else I've seen.
Yeah.
I mean, if there was a column to the right of column 8 that was red, yellow, or green to tell me how whether this was something that was on fire or this was something that's coming along swimmingly.
Yeah.
That to me personally would satisfy my needs for understanding what's going on underneath the hood.
Good.
And I mean, this is, I think, wunderbar, personally
Cool.
speaking.
Cool.
This is brilliant.
Good.
So these are prioritized?
They are not prioritized.
Oh, I understood you saying they were prioritized.
They are not prioritized.
So
Not right.
if they were
Yeah.
to be prioritized for our benefit,
Mhm.
from fire to
Mhm.
not fire, glacier,
Yeah.
if there is a way to do that, I would know that beyond budget,
Yep.
resources,
Yep.
Availability of capacity,
Yep.
anything like
Yeah,
that.
yeah. I would say that to Evan's point, and we won't.
Yeah, exactly.
Oh, yeah,
I was gonna
we won't-
say,
This is
that
what I
was
was
very
saying.
simple.
Yeah, we
No,
won't.
but
We won't.
But still.
We won't spend a.
No.
We'll go through these in more detail, but as we think about our workloads, and if things had to drop off this list, we would start it with those things, unless they were truly urgent. Start with those things that are just in the conceptual phase and parking lot those.
Be cool to have it's a ton of work, but it would be cool to have a sort of an ongoing, dashboard for each of these.
Yeah, absolutely.
In a way that would
Yeah.
be, with the key, at some point anyway, discussing kind of the key performance indicators
Yep.
for these that could be included in that.
Yep. And tie them to the budget.
Yeah.
Yep. Yep.
You could also just add a priority ranking.
Sure. Yep. Yep.
What's the column to the right?
So we have the far right are just
After
some
framework.
the
So
notes.
after column D?
Yeah, I think these are just notes.
I think the two that you
Yeah.
can see are just other
Yeah.
possible,
Yeah.
other possible work groups or just other notes.
Yeah.
Okay.
So when we were trying to tie this objective, we were going back and forth. Is it really user services that's the lead, or is it a partnership framework objective, or is it really information infrastructure? And the other one was about funding.
But,
Yeah.
but given this structure, if you had something that was like priority 1, if this was something that we all agreed really needed to get done, and it lingered down under conceptual for a while, that's truly the business of the commission to pay attention to.
Yeah.
How you do it is not so much.
Yeah.
But at that level, that is our business, and this sort of a tool would be very helpful for helping us tease that out, especially if it's left as a spreadsheet like this, because one could sort.
Yeah.
And sort by work group.
Yeah.
So
Good.
in other words,
Yes.
what is responsibility of the work group?
Mhm.
Yeah.
Good. Yeah.
I mean, if I had received this as part of my packet, I'd probably sit down and play with it for 5 or 10 minutes to kind of see how things were shaking out,
Mhm.
and just kind of identify the parts that I was going to ask questions about at
Mhm.
this meeting.
Mhm.
This would be a great tool for me.
Good. Good.
I mean, we've been going around in circles about this for so long. This is it
Yeah.
for me. And it should be shared with the public.
It
It should
will
be shared.
for
It
sure.
should be someplace on the front splash page of the state library thing, so that
Mhm.
it's completely transparent what we
Mhm.
think we're up to.
Mhm. And just a reminder, when we have our strategic framework, we have our framework goals. We talk about what we will do and why we will do it. The guts of this is the how we will accomplish those strategic objectives, and those are the work plan items. And so that's sort of how we share this information publicly. So
Jenny, is the goal to add a column that somehow identifies the cost associated with each line?
I don't know that.
Or is that not?
I don't know if we would do that in this working document,
Right.
but to the extent that these projects have project budgets in the budget,
Mhm.
we can tie that to the budget that you'll have.
Okay. That might be interesting
Mhm.
for the future for legislative purposes.
Sure.
And of course, anything in any of the columns, but particularly in column 8, could be hyperlinked to something.
Mhm. Absolutely.
Oh,
Yeah.
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 This is great for a week's worth of work. I mean, congratulations.
Oh, thanks.
You guys
Yeah.
are working, it looks like you're working really well together as a full staff.
I think so. So let's talk about what some of these actually are. I really appreciate the feedback on the structure, and I'm glad it's useful for all of you. We've talked a lot about the organizational structure. Census 2020, we have staff working in sort of two different ways. We have staff who are working directly with the census on ensuring that the address data is the most accurate it can be before going into the census. And then we have staff who are working directly with libraries to make sure that libraries are doing what they can to promote the census, working within their local communities. So that's a significant priority for this coming year. The Digital Public Library of America pilot is something that we've talked about in the past. We're evaluating a new ebook platform. We have a series of metrics that we're evaluating to understand whether or not this new platform will help us address concerns with our Montana Library to Go ebook service, like the significant holds queues. We want to know whether or not this new opportunity will allow us to include schools in an ebook service, what opportunities there are in the future to explore OER, the Open Educational Resources, with the university, and also how we integrate the different kinds of state library collections that are available in ebook form to make them more discoverable. I'm going to just run through this list, so stop me if you have questions. LIDAR, we're going to have a discussion about LIDAR later in your meeting, so I'll just kind of breeze past that one for now, except to say that one of the important components of this project will be the storage costs to store and serve the LIDAR data that's being made available through this project. And we have some one-time only monies from the legislature that we want to use to demonstrate how we would fund these kinds of services that are growing more critical to the state. And so one of the ways we anticipate using some of those one-time only monies is to help with that storage cost. There's sort of a series of productivity tool objectives. I mentioned earlier that when we had staff working in different divisions, we had staff using different kinds of productivity tools. Some staff were starting to use Microsoft tools, other staff were using tools called Asana. We had staff using other tools yet with different kinds of projects. We want to make sure that as an agency we're using a single set of tools to help with productivity and communication, especially with our remote staff. And so we have an engagement team of staff. We're evaluating the different tool options, and we'll make a recommendation back to the leadership team about which tools we should use. And then there are other future needs for continued Is it just staff online, or do we have others?
It's just staff at the moment.
It's back.
Okay.
Jenny, the public library standards.
Yes.
That goes into our local county libraries as
Mhm.
well.
Exactly. These are the standards that public libraries have to meet in order But one of the pieces of information that's actually protected by law is what information users are using. For example, what books they are checking out. Some libraries maintain that data, others do not. But that information can be transported between the client-based system in a library and the vendor. And so this VPN will help protect that data.
So on that.
These are installed client systems, and it's not going through a web-based.
It is HTTPS.
The web, so the web. Yes.
Is that because Cersei Dynix hasn't created an encrypted client, or?
Cersei Dynix does have a cloud-based option. That's what staff want to move to. But they haven't really tested it with Consortia, and we are so big and complicated that we can't really make that move. That's part of the process that we have to go through. We need VPNs for those clients, basically, to be able to protect that data that's traveling that way.
It seems like a lot of overhead if you've got to have a VPN connection for every library.
And this is where having the MSC staff are online, and they could do a better job of describing it. They have worked out the system. And then the key thing is, it's really our largest libraries that we need to protect first, because that's the vast majority of the data that's moving. It's a multi-step process.
Yep.
Do you envision a time when there will be an ILS available that would satisfy both functional needs and security needs? Have
MSC staff
Friend-
work very hard. They want to
friendly, patron-facing?
Yeah. And, I mean, these are, as Jenny and Evan both said, these are just kind of a list. If you were to see all the MSC together, you would see how they are doing that, how they want to do mobile design, how they want to set the system up to be cloud-based, and not just cloud-based, but right now, because we have sharing groups within sharing groups primarily, plus some other reasons, they really have to, we're really locked into Cersei. And we would like to make it possible for us to look at other options, because that is tricky to be locked into one vendor.
So the object really isn't to be cloud-based, it's to have this list of functionality that is commonly found in a cloud-based solution.
Yeah, I mean, really what they want is for end users to be able to get the information they need in whatever, whether it's on their phone or laptop or whatever format the user wants.
I keep thinking back to the fair use resolution and how the requirements of that, what that would suggest to me,
Yes.
and I assume more generally, is that we need to move to solutions that allow those kinds of solutions.
Yes, and of course that's all tied into the broadband, because some libraries still don't have a fast enough internet connection to really handle this kind of traffic. It's all interconnected.
It's kind of like we want to do telemedicine, but there's no phone line to these libraries.
Here's the pigeons.
Only one doctor, yeah.
Yeah.
Moldova.
I'm going
Thank
to move on. We're continuing to focus on web accessibility, making sure the staff are trained and that we're improving our web content to ensure that it's accessible. Aaron Fashway and John Kilgara have been involved with a group at the state level that's looking at grant management tools and trying to standardize grant management tools. This would greatly simplify and make more efficient our work to administer the MLIAC grants. There's a bit Information Technology Services Division on a virtual desktop or unified desktop rollout that the state is implementing for staff who have pretty straightforward desktop computing needs. That's relatively simple, and SITSD has those virtual desktop options available. But for our staff who have more complex computing needs, like the GIS software, the software to administer the Montana Shared Catalog, and the Montana Memory Project, we have to work with SITSD to make sure that those kinds of software are compatible with the virtual desktop option that they're rolling out. But there's some significant benefits that we're striving for. It will lessen our hardware footprint for the agencies, so we won't have as much investment in larger desktop hardware. We'll be able to push more of our desktop support on SITSD and less on our limited IT staff. And we also think that moving to the virtual desktops will make connectivity and connections for our remote staff easier as they access the state system.
Does the state solution have a GPU graphical? I mean, that's the GIS limitation, I assume, is the graphical interface, or the
That's gonna.
I mean, like Amazon has that, but you pay a lot more for a virtual machine that because of the graphics capability.
Well, we'll ask Tom to report back to the commission on some of the opportunities and challenges of working through the virtual desktop.
I wouldn't presume to give advice on this, but I would just ask, just to mention publicly, to witness this morning's snafus with a very simple thing, actually, compared to some of this. Virtual desktops are not without their problems. I talked to the Lord and Master. I was involved early on in several attempts to go virtual, and it really always seemed like such a good plan. Always, we never did.
We have it
I know
rolled
the
out
world's
for
changed.
about half a dozen staff right
How
now.
long have you been using a virtual desktop? About 6 months?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Mhm.
Any issues?
Largely no. Yep. Yeah.
Yeah, they have all of our GIS software to test at ITSD
Yeah.
before any kind of implementation happens,
Yeah.
and then we'll be involved. And assuming they can get that to work in the testing phase as well.
We're working through the Talking Book Library Services to roll out a number of different kinds of adaptive technologies, from virtual headsets to something called a swell printer that prints on specialized paper that can create raised print, potentially raised maps and other kinds of graphics. So we're excited to start to roll those out and test them. We want to make them available to our patrons. We want to make them available to other state agencies who have concerns about needs for adaptive technologies. Once we have those rolled out, we'll do a little technology petting zoo with the commission at a future meeting. Some of these are pretty neat. Staff are working to standardize web services environment. I shouldn't say too much more about that and let Evan.
As the staff are working to make changes. Funding limitations required us to adapt our web, our managed services environment to more of a standardized version of what the SRI offers. And so we're working with agencies that use that managed services environment to make sure that this is going to continue to serve their needs. Met yesterday, actually. Fewer of the concerns we had feared came up, and the one situation actually doesn't have a whole lot to do with those changes, but to some other changes to services that we're implementing. So this is going well, and I think it'll actually much smaller and very quickly resolved item.
Is this primarily the cadastral?
For us, it's primarily the spatial data infrastructure web services. We do have other web services, but that's a primary way that we make those available. But I don't want to get too far in the weeds of technical details.
So those are the ones that are in progress. The number of items are in the planning stages. Some of them are in discussions with our advisory councils. The economic development effort, in discussions with the Network Advisory Council, we plan to budget $10,000 to hire a contractor to help us evaluate and serve as a liaison with the economic development community to better understand what opportunities exist and how we might prioritize our approach to those kinds of opportunities. We think it's important to have someone from that community who speaks their language that can be that bridge to attend the Economic Development Association meetings, the Workforce Development, Chambers of Commerce, and others that they might recommend. We really don't have anybody on staff, and there's not anybody that we know of within our community that can really play that role for us. This is how we approach our childhood services for library development. We don't have a childhood services librarian on staff. We contract with a youth services and children's librarian to bring us ideas and suggestions for programs and services and to provide professional development to librarians and to be that liaison with different kinds of communities that are looking at early literacy, for example. So we have a lot to learn and a lot to focus on, and from that we hope that we can make the most of future investments as we think about how we approach economic development and our role in supporting our communities in their economic development work.
One sort of connection there between that and the Census 2020. From talking to Megan about, I can't remember the name of the term, but there's a way to demark a census that's sub-county, but not a census designated place, which has a lot more rules and regulations about contiguity and things. And that, she was talking about next spring potentially looking at that. It's kind of a once in a decade opportunity, and and I'm thinking particularly tribal nations, and with our GIS capability at the library, it'd be interesting to do a little bit of, be a little proactive with that, so that when you're looking at that, it's strategic around the state. So where do you most need those kind of sub-county demarcations? Because then the census does the full, not full on, but they do a lot more, provide a lot more information to you about that area as part of the process. So I don't know a lot about it, but Megan's been, sounds like she's been really on it. So. And that's not really the traditional economic development, but that's probably tied to federal grants and other opportunities. A really important thing to know.
Yeah, that's good to know. The work in front of us with this particular objectives to start is developing the solicitation to hire a contractor. So we will be working with our staff as well as representatives from our advisory councils to help us construct the solicitation and evaluate the responses that we get, and then to develop the contract and the deliverables we want to see from that kind of contract. So good information to think about. You'll see a couple of RFPs on the work plan. Both our Montana Library to Go service through Overdrive and our OCLC group services contract come up for contract. Their contract deadlines are at the start of the next fiscal year, so it's time for us to go out and evaluate the marketplace for those two services, Montana Library to Go being the ebook platform, and again, the Digital Public Library of America work will help inform that RFP. And then our OCLC group services contract, this is going to be different for us. OCLC provides a suite of services that support interlibrary loan and cataloging and other library management services. And for a long time, they were the only game in town and really a pivotal partner in providing library services. and the state had approved a sole source designation for OCLC for these services. The nature of the relationship with OCLC has changed over the years, and there are other players in this area, we think, that might be able to provide some of these services. And so the intent is to go forward with an RFI followed by an RFP later this year, looking at the different services rather than a single contract for all of those services. That doesn't mean that we won't end up with a single contract for all of those services, but we want to make sure that we're being really efficient in how we're delivering the services that libraries need, and that may come through additional vendors rather than just a single vendor.
I think the last I heard about this is that you were feeling like you just weren't getting much attention from OCLC anymore.
Yeah.
Is that still the case?
That's still the case. And products specifically like Content EM, you know, it's just a dog. They're not developing it. We're incredibly frustrated with the technology. We also know that our current OCLC Group Services contract for interlibrary loan was intended to really support a vast amount of interlibrary loan all across the state that isn't occurring. We don't see a lot of libraries conducting interlibrary loan. School libraries conducting interlibrary loan. A lot of our public libraries are doing ILL through and resource sharing through the user sharing groups in the Montana Shared Catalog. So we need to better scale those kinds of services to meet actual needs and make sure that we're using our funding resources most wisely. We've talked about this before. The state is rolling out a performance management system, and so we will be working with the state and our supervisors and leads to implement their performance management system. It's been about a year and a half, but we talked about the real-time network. This is the connected GPS units around the state to provide real-time access to hyperlocal information. The state currently has a pilot with the state of Washington that's concluding later this year, and the intent is to stand up a network on our own. We're working very closely with the tribes and the Montana Department of Transportation, and thinking about how we might serve as the host for the data there. The Gigabit Toolkit is a study we've talked a little bit with the Commission about. We used some coal severance tax funds to hire a contractor to complete a Gigabit Toolkit for all the public libraries and branches in the state. I think we got all but 2 completed. The toolkit helps libraries to evaluate their broadband connectivity and their hardware and software environments. So, for example, how old their networking equipment is, the number of public access computers they have and how old they are, availability of Wi-Fi. It does speed testing against their broadband networks and documents all of that information. So each library now has their own completed toolkit that they can start evaluating with their own boards. We have all of the raw data that we'll be putting into a database and a GIS that we can then use to begin to evaluate what future opportunities we as a state have to think about EPP requests to support increased broadband to libraries or other kinds of collaborative efforts around broadband, maybe a hardware refreshment program in the future. We'll be getting advice from the Network Advisory Council on how best to use this data to inform future investment in broadband and public computing in libraries. We talked a little bit about the MSC and some of their work. We need to continue to make improvements to our own intranet to make sure that staff have ready access to information resources that they need, from internal policies to state policies, forms that they need to use. We want to make sure that the intranet is most efficient for our staff. We've had an effort to work with our libraries on our different cost share formulas. This was something that was discussed at the Network Advisory Council meeting last week. we have different cost share formulas for our different consortia within the library community. They're all based on different metrics. Some incentivize engagement, others may unnecessarily disincentivize use. They're complex. It's challenging for libraries to use them to create their budgets. We would love to see a better, maybe a single cost share formula where any library can pay for those services that they use under a single model that also helps libraries when there are challenges with their own budgets, have some flexibility without disproportionately hurting the other members of the consortium. It's a very complex challenge, one that the executive boards of the Montana Shared Catalog and Montana Library to Go are taking on this year, and will be taking on with advice from the Network Advisory Council and our staff. I keep saying the one cost share formula to rule them all. So those are the ones that are in the planning. I know we're running a little bit long, so I'll just ask quickly if there's anything else, Evan, you want to make sure that we highlight, or anything that jumps out at the commission. I guess one thing in particular that I'll highlight for the commission, based on your discussion around partnerships. This was a discussion that we had at our all-staff meeting last week. We think we need to do some community mapping around our partners so that we have a better understanding of which staff are engaging with partners, where there's overlap in our engagement, how we define our levels of engagement with different partners. I think that's a really important first step before we then organize our actual partnership engagement and outreach work with those partners. And I think it makes a lot of sense to make sure that if this is something important to the commission, that the commission is involved in that community mapping effort.
I guess of their does that just bring your attention mainly to Community Data Hub and duplication on demand, and geo-enabled elections. Those three, Community Data Hub is the next steps in the state publication plan process that was documented pretty well over this past year, that we kind of closed out that work task because that was the foundational work, and this will be the work actually implementing that kind of a model, and we're still early in the planning there. Similarly, duplication on demand, we did the digitization, talked the book library. This is a hot topic in the NLS, the National Library Service world, but there's still not a lot of great guidance out there. In some ways, we'd like to be further along in this, but our concern is the lack of support at the federal level right now, and a need to make sure that if we go to this, it's the place we want to be, but that the support resources will be there to allow that to happen. And then geo-enabled elections, I don't think any specific work task item that we tracked last year, but it was on the added items at the bottom until upcoming projects, so just worth pointing that out. I think that was all of the ones here that had some attachment, at least on the digital library side from last year, 2 items. I mean, there were some things you went through earlier.
Yep.
But
Yep.
as far as the ones that kind of talked about.
I think I may have skipped over the House Bill 633 study. So we did have one meeting with legislative financial staff, Chris all of our services, or they're proposing collecting information about the cost of all of our services. And in discussion with Chris, we also think it's important for them to hear cost information about all of the services that are going unfunded right now and that we're not able to do due to a lack of funding. And then talking about different kinds of funding opportunities and different kinds of funding models.
Would it be inappropriate to request that this list be, that you assign some sort of importance or priority or stuff that needs to be addressed first, second, third, or whatever makes sense to staff?
This work plan list?
Yeah.
No, I don't think that would be inappropriate. I think we can.
Because that would be very helpful to me, to see what staff thinks needs to get worked on right away. And I'm struggling to figure out if that, I don't think it has much to do with importance, but I think it has more to do with sort of urgency. Exactly, that was the word that came to me.
Okay.
My only concern when you say this list is that we still haven't tapered down this list. Even, we've looked at who the obvious leads are.
No,
or tried to
I
identify.
get that.
So as we get this more refined to
I mean this list generically.
Yeah.
Okay, I assume that when you start attaching urgency, that it will thin down.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's kind of what I mean.
Process.
Even
Yeah.
though some of these are in progress, we haven't even had a chance to go back and look at who's working on these and if just the items that are in progress, if that's realistic for people to do.
And that's and that gets at
Yep. Help us better evaluate how staff are spending their time so we can have better information about how much time staff have to actually focus on some of these kinds of things over and above their regular.
and if staff assigns a priority of one to one thing and three to another, for instance, and for some reason I think that three really should be reconsidered, that would provide an opportunity for communication. I'm not sure it should change the listing, but it will take and show us more transparently what staff is thinking, and there'll be less, well, I thought you were working on this kinds of things.
Yeah. And I actually think that will be a helpful communication tool amongst staff to understand as they're working together the level of importance for different project work among staff.
Cool. And again, then that should be made public.
I assume the tool committee is maybe looking at this, but I'm not enough of an Excel expert to know how dynamic filtering can be, but maybe that's one way to bring the long sort of stagnating reporting Tableau thing out is to apply it to this. For years I've used Line Manager software for filtering like that because it's kind of a generic tool for it. And I know it's possible with other ways to do it, but that's, besides sorting, the filtering part is really criteria. So anyway, I just sense.
Good. I'm glad that this is going to be useful for you.
Yeah.
I have a comment or question. This goes back to your DPLA item, and you're talking specifically about their ebook program. But you and I and UM and the Historical Society are splitting the cost of membership to be a DPLA hub for harvesting digital collections, right, and making them accessible. And I know there's value to being part of something like that. But one of the promises of this membership was that DPLA would drive more visitation to our digital collections, and it's really not happening. I mean, we get a few hundred, I think collectively we get a few hundred referrals a month from DPLA. It's really nothing in the scheme of things. And we've talked about this before. We always said we were going to come back and reevaluate whether this membership has value. And we talked to DPLA, I think you were on that call last December, and suggested what they need to do. And I just don't see any progress from them. I don't think they're interested in our suggestions. So I don't know, and this also sort of speaks to your OCLC item as well, because there's overlap with.
For sure.
So I don't know if that's something you also want to have on the list to really
To continue to
try figure
evaluate.
out.
Yep.
Well, continue to evaluate, but actually come to a decision.
Sure.
I mean, at some point, I either need to shut up about this or, you know, but it's pretty frustrating to me.
Okay. Good. Any other comments? Well, good. Thanks for the good questions and discussion.
Thank you. I'm really looking forward to the next iteration of where this work is going. I have an interest to have the keep moving, so I'm going to just let everyone know if you need to use the bathroom, go ahead and just get up. I think we should keep going. So instead of taking a break, if you need one, take one. We'll move on to the Montana Natural Heritage Program FY20 progress report. Do we?
Can I don't want
Yes.
to interrupt that. One request, just as far as a later schedule change. After that, we've got the Land Information Council report followed by the grant presentation. We move that up. Tommy's here from out of town. And
Okay.
So after Bryce's, we would do Tommy.
Okay.
So it's just a switch of those two.
It'll take me a couple minutes to get set up if you guys want to take a quick break.
Yeah, you guys need
And
to.
also on the
Can I just
action
use your
items
laptop?
that you guys
Yes,
go after
please.
lunch, is there a way that we could move to the front?
Just a browser?
A browser and
Well,
I just
the-
have
for
four,
PowerPoint.
so if I was not an idiot, let's see, I would be there.
I think it'd be okay to just
Just to keep it
keep
as
moving
is.
forward. Yeah, I appreciate that.
I'm going to pass around some just example material. And Evan, did they get the scope of work report or?
I don't think so.
Okay, I'll pass that around as well. These are all the same, so there's 3 examples that are the same, so you could,
Just keep.
yeah.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and there's just one scope of work report here.
Okay.
And then if I could open a couple browser windows.
Well, I think that's what we should certainly.
I'll let
It
you
might be-
drive.
Yeah, I'll get you a chair.
Oh, I can move back. You're fine.
Okay.
Just don't trip.
All right, sounds good.
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. Your own computer. I have no idea. They're all one thing. It's been suggested that these items that we've been discussing this morning, and some of these items, if they could be made available afterwards, so that since they were discussed at this meeting, that they were available to anyone who wished to see them. I think that would be a good plan. But is that possible, Bryce, to make these documents available?
Absolutely.
And ditto
Yep.
for the,
And you put draft on it, put work plan, put draft, so that everybody knows it's not, so they don't hyperventilate.
Okay. Good point. Thanks, Elsa.
I'm getting drunk. Drowning in my own cup. Bryce, while you're getting prepared for this, I have to tell you that I was hiking in Mount Helena, and there I was with both Solomon seal and false Solomon seal right in front of me. And
Classic dilemma.
a classic, we were baffled and bewildered. And so I popped out my telephone, which was there in case I needed to send my wife a picture of the flower, and looked it up, and they were sitting cheek to jowl on the field guide, and it answered. It cleared up my confusion. Although right now, if I to tell you the difference, I'd have to look it back up again, which is embarrassing. But it was like it was.
Good to hear.
Anytime you can help pull back the veils of ignorance, you've done a good thing.
Exactly.
They're so voluminous.
Give me some idea, Aaron, in terms of what you want me to. I've got 13 slides, and I was thinking we would talk about half an hour, but I know you've gone over time, so.
I think if you can just point out what you feel like are some of the main parts
Okay.
of your progress.
Okay. Well, just as a starter and reminder what our program does, we manage statewide databases on plant and animal species. We kind of keep track of the lists of species that occur in the state and the communities that occur in the state. We track spatial information on those species and communities. And then we also do a bunch of tabular information like accounts in the field guide and management of information on those species or community status, their conservation status. With the whole was to focus on species of conservation concern in environmental reviews and planning processes. So we are the state's major source of information for environmental reviews. And I just wanted to start by just giving you, did you want to?
Sorry, they weren't seeing your screen.
Oh.
So we're trying to get it to where they were seeing your screen.
Okay. So just to, again, kind of let you know where we're standing here. The black line in this figure is showing the history of our core funding from the state, and the red line is showing what that buying power is over time. We've been basically completely steady with no present law adjustments since FY08, and then we had the budget cut in 17, and so we're overall reduction of about 56% from our core funding in FY18.
Say that again, Bryce. Reduction of funding of 56%.
56% of our buying power has been lost since FY08.
Okay, you said 18.
Oh, did I?
That's
I'm
right.
sorry. I was trying to figure out why it's not working
It's not working.
in terms of
I'm actually
forwarding.
trying to use this part. I did get it where they can see online what you're doing, but. Yeah, that's not working.
There we go.
Okay.
Yep. So last intersession, we were in front of the Environmental Quality Council to give testimony on, we were asked to be in front of them to give testimony on what our funding needs were. And basically, this is a summary of that with the center in red there. If you look at being our focus of where we want to go, FY19, for example, and the main point with the pie chart on the left is just to say that we are leveraging a lot of funding to run this program. So 22% of that is that state core funding, and 78% of our funding for our program is leveraged from our partners. So we're at a point where we're kind of at a back-breaking point in terms of that ratio. So we're asking for the state to reinvest and stabilize the program, and that is around $300,000 there per year, $311,000 for the core contract. And to make sure that we're not getting back into the same situation, we're also looking for present law adjustments. And House Bill 633, as Jenny was saying, and the account, digital library funding account that was established with that legislation, and being in front of the Legislative Finance Committee for studying how to fund that account is the next step. And there's a lot of info here, but basically what I want to get at here is that our existing funding, our core state funding, is quite small for our core 12 core positions. What we want to do is bring those 12 core positions up to around 50% on average, but we're not asking any of those positions to be fully funded with state funding. We want to operate like a business and have our partners buy into what our mission is, and we're doing that successfully, but we just want to, again, stabilize the core funding portion. That's all I'm going to say about funding. With our map viewer application, this is how we show spatial information to our partners. We have over 2,000 accounts from agency personnel that use this application. They use it in their everyday environmental planning processes. We've divided this web application up into a variety of tasks. The general public has access to these up here. And then you'll see a replication of some of those, but additional tasks coming in on the image down below that have agency level access only. Two major things that we want to work on moving forward with this application is a predicted biodiversity task. And in order to do that, what we're going to do is take on something quite lofty, and that is we're going to create predicted habitat suitability models in the next year or so for around 700 vertebrate species and around 2,900 vascular plant species. That's huge. That's a huge deal, but we're gearing up and getting going on it. But what then the point of this is for our partners is that then we can stack those predicted habitat suitability models up for various species groups. So we can say, if you're an FWP biologist and you care about large mammal fauna, you can say, what's the predicted biodiversity of large mammals? What's the predicted biodiversity of fish species? What's overall vertebrate biodiversity predicted if you're a county commissioner and wanting to determine growth policy in areas that you want to grow or develop moving forward? So that's the goal of that task. And a second task, I think, crosswalks with something that I would like to put out there as a future vision for the overall library, and that's the geo-referenced references. So you've got everything from a report that an agency biologist has written to an environmental review document, NEPA or MEPA. Let's make that spatial, and let's allow our users to look at the spatial distribution of those reports around the state. So the idea is someone would be able to go in, draw a polygon, and they would get back state, federal, university publications, published, unpublished documents that are referencing those spatial locations. So we're starting to do this. We've got a trial going right now where we're starting to digitize reports or publications that we're working on adding information into our databases for. But I think that that represents a good long-term vision for the library. If you're out there somewhere anywhere in the state, it's really nice to have that spatial component.
Are you thinking zoomable?
Absolutely. Yep. Map Viewer is very, very dynamic in terms of moving in and out. And I apologize. We may be able to get into it here with a question or two, but I wanted to say that the environmental summary report, again, has become, in this last year, we first released this about 1.5 years ago. We've worked with our agency partners over the last year to refine it, and it's in a stable situation now with partner input. So we're feeling good about this, and we're really noticing that our web statistics are moving so that rather than accessing 4 different portions of our website, they're going straight to the environmental summary report, running one report, and kind of being done because we've kind of packaged it all together. So we're happy about that. You'll see that in our scope of work in terms of some of our downloads of, say, Excel files or field guides off of the field guide have dropped a little bit, but it's because we're packaging them right in the environmental summary reports. So we're saving them time and effort, and also making sure that our user experience is consistent across agencies and users. Our field guide has been our most popular website for years. This last year, we had it go up to 65 and almost a half hours of use on the average workday. It was about 58 hours on the average workday last year, so a good 12%-ish increase there. We increased to 353,000 plus unique users. That's a 17% increase. 1.45 million page views, a 6% increase. And we had, on the field guide, you can download custom field guides of individual species groups, and those went up to 28 per day on average, so that's a 12% increase. You can see in the bottom image on the left, Montanans are the dominant users, but we've got people all over the country using our field guide, and we've got people all. It's very clear that people are using the field guide to come here and plan their vacations where they want to go. You can see the top cities ranked from 1 to 10 here. Salt Lake City is number 1, Seattle, but you can see some flight patterns there as people are flying to Montana, they're planning their trip. And we also see some agency-based users in those cities as well. So we have been working on when the budget cuts hit, we, in 17, we had already been kind of toying with the idea of, and we've been approached by other states to run field guides for them or prop up field guides for them. But we started looking at it like maybe we should look at this as a business opportunity as part of this. And so this is a sort of a market study I put together in terms of interest from other heritage programs. There are heritage programs in all 50 states, all of the Canadian provinces. So all of the red programs there are saying yes, they would be interested in those different types of guides, online guides, and the blue said no. But a lot of interest out there. And so this last year and a half, we've gotten around $180,000 of funding from Wyoming, Utah, and California now to update our code. So it's benefiting our program to get our code updated to a modern code base. And we're working now in the Amazon Web Services environment and using DynamoDB to store the information. Rockset is a software package that indexes everything in that table and allows searches to run quickly, and then we're storing our images and sound files in S3 storage buckets. We think that the long-term costs of launching guides are somewhere around $10,000 per program, and the long-term cost of maintaining those guides is, we're trying to keep it very minimal. We're not proposing to make money off of this in the long term, but helping out programs launch guides while helping ourselves. The image on the left here shows you programs that are overall interested, and essentially what I want you to take home from that is those in white have said they're not interested, but pretty much all of those with various colors are interested in launching guides. So we're having a lot of interest there. And I think I want to just step out of this PowerPoint and just show you something on the web quickly with that.
And who is it specifically that you're speaking with in each of these states and provinces about their interest?
They're heritage programs. There are heritage programs in all 50 states.
And all the provinces, all the Canadian provinces?
Yep, they're called conservation data centers there. So we have put this what I'm showing you is just running off of our servers. I tried, and I'm not going to be able to access our AWS version here, but I just wanted to show you. So if a user in our state, we want to show you that, one, this is cool for other states, but we're also getting the code updated for us, but we're also benefiting our agency partners and citizens of Montana by saying, okay, I'm looking at the loon account for Montana. Now I want to say, well, what do we know about loons in Wyoming? So this launches the Wyoming field guide that is still running on our server at this point for loons. Very similar account. We're kind of feeding off of a service that they've put together showing map information for their species. it's kind of interesting to go through and talk to other programs, getting ideas on, oh, well, you want that? That's a great idea. We'll improve our field guide with your idea. So showing photos of habitat is an example of that. And then let's say, well, okay, that same user is now saying, I want to look at Utah. So this is the Utah field guide. We've gotten some great, actually, behind-the-scenes tips from some Utah programmers on mobile, making it more mobile compatible. So our field guide right now is not mobile compatible, and it can be a little frustrating sometimes on that front. But the AWS version will be mobile compatible. So that, I just wanted to give you a quick idea of that vision of being able to go from state to state to state as a network there. One other thing I wanted to say about that, one of my worst fears is that our web programmer will crash on his motorcycle or something and we'll go, oh my God, how are we going to run things? But if we work with our partners, it makes the whole network more stable. Someone else can step in. So that's one of the other benefits of doing this. I wanted to say just very quickly that we are running, again, the budget cuts weren't certainly positive, but I'm trying to focus on some of the positives that have come out of it because it's made us stretch and do things better. One of those examples is this Survey 123 applications we've worked with our agency partners on, and that is how do we get data into our system more efficiently with our agency partners, and it's really improved things. So we have a general smartphone application for agencies, and the general public can use it. That's that Heritage Observation Collector in red. And then we also have individual surveys for individual species or species groups. That data in the Heritage Observation Collector, if it's an approved agency biologist, will go right into our database. So the idea and the vision here is they go out, they run their environmental summary report one morning before they go to their field site that they're reviewing, maybe a timber harvest or something like that. They're out there, they can look at the document while they're on the ground, and then they can pull out, oh, I just saw a goshawk. They can pull out their Survey 123 app, they can enter it. If they get back before 5 o'clock and upload that information, they can rerun their environmental summary report the next day, and the data that they entered the day before will be in the environmental summary report, and that's working now. If it's information from the general public, it kind of goes into a holding tank. So invasive species information was another real boon for us that saved us from impacts to staff when the budget cuts hit. So we are now up to 851 non-native species in our information system, which about 20 months ago we had maybe 30. So a huge advance. We have this invasive species guide that breaks down invasive species by aquatic invasive, noxious weeds, forest pests, agricultural pests, other non-natives, and then biocontrol species that are used to control the invaders. We have full accounts for all of the aquatic invasive species now in place, full accounts for all of the noxious weeds, and 13 of the 15 forest pests. A lot of these other accounts are more shell accounts that we need to fully develop. So we just need to keep working on that. We did not get funding in this last legislative session to nearly the level that we had it the previous biennium. So we'll kind of creep forward. But I want to say that the feedback that we've gotten from county weed coordinators and from agency biologists is basically, finally, information in one place. Invasive species information in particular was just scattered all over the place. So you can imagine all kinds of activities that are going on in with an environmental, or being considered in an environmental review process, if you don't know what weeds might move in because of some disturbance that's being considered, it's a bit troublesome. So packaging that together has made a lot of sense for our partners. Highlights from our botany program. So again, I said one of our goals is to provide full taxonomic lists of all the species that occur in the state. So we added 1,205 diatom species. For those of you who don't know about diatoms, they're these microscopic photosynthesizing creatures, protists. They're not plants. You might say, oh, well, that's nice. But it's actually very important to our agency partners. DEQ uses these species to help aid in monitoring water quality standards around the state. So it is pretty important to our partners, our agency partners, for on-the-ground management. But in terms of our mission of having complete reference to species, we now feel like we're really well set on our vascular plant species coverage, our mosses, our lichens, our liverworts. And one thing that we'll be focused on in the coming year, on the bottom red line there, is we want to make sure we get full taxonomic information references for macrofungi, the mushrooms. We just don't have really any coverage for them at this point, and also algae. And at that point, we are really close. This is super exciting to having like full botanical representation of all species. We're nowhere close on the animal front, but that's something that I am very proud of. We're getting close, and in a few more years we'll have it. On the observation front, we added over 500,000 observation records for native botanical species. This is a chart that Andrea Pipp had put together for our last year's partners meeting, showing how numbers of observations that we've had over time. So as of last year, we had 707,103 records total. So you can see, put that into reference as to how many we added this last year. Part of that, we were able to use some of the invasive species money. Whenever we would go out and grab a database that had invasive species data, we would just append all the native and invasive species at the same time. So that really benefited our databases as a whole. We also have digitized range polygons for 264 vascular plants. So now in the field guide, back to Bruce's example, he sees two species in the field guide that are similar, but is it here, is it native, or is it introduced, or is it native, and is it here versus here to exclude species? And the main reason we're doing the range polygons right now is that we're about to gear up for that predicted habitat suitability modeling work. So that's part of that. We added 10,584 photos to the field guide. Again, that brings those field guide accounts to life. But we still have a long way to go, so we want to keep working on better photo representation. Funding is the conservation status ranks, and really having those out systematically for all species. In our ecology program, we only mapped 24 quads this last year, which was a little frustrating. Partners just, we did not have the big buy-ins in terms of wetland mapping that we've had in past years. We're up to 86% of the state, but we've had a recent commitment from NRCS to map 54 quads, and then the Forest Service may be able to do another 50 quads, which would cover all Forest Service lands. So if we can get that funding from the Forest Service, we'd have most of the federal lands, and then it's just a private land situation at that point. Last year I had reported basically Jessica Mitchell had just accepted the director's position at our spatial analysis lab in Missoula. And she's working out great. She's really made a good outreach to our partners. She's taken on several projects in mapping invasive species for the Fish and Wildlife Service, some greater sage grouse productivity work in terms of both invertebrate diversity, that is a reason for driving sage grouse dynamics, as well as habitat for sage grouse. And then that NTSG stands for the Numerical Terradynamics Simulation Group. So for those of you who don't know, that's that's Steve Running's group. He's the Nobel laureate who's focused on climate change. But he actually reached out after the search, reached out to Jessica and said, we want to get meaningful products to public citizens in Montana as part of some upcoming grants. So that's exactly what I wanted from that position. So things like, if you were a farmer and you need to know evapotranspiration rates in order to know where your crops are standing on the water level, that's the kind of product that they hopefully will be working on moving forward, kind of in a real-time scenario. The other thing I wanted to highlight, we took on a major project with BLM for their AIM veg assessment work. That's Rangeland Assessment Inventory and Monitoring Program. It's basically to assess impacts from, say, livestock grazing or something like that, to make sure that they're making informed decisions. They had been hiring the crews themselves. They kind of outsourced that to us, and that's important to us because I think what we can do with that in the future moving forward, as I was saying, one of the bottom blocks there is, I think we can get a vegetation ecologist position funded off of kind of overseeing that work, and that helps us out in the botanical realm, which we just don't have enough expertise in place right now with the large number of species. We want to, again, secure funding for wetland mapping. We want to create a life cycle plan for our land cover layer and move that forward, working with partners. And then the bottom one there, create a vegetation plot tracking database. Again, this invasive species work has made us realize we can do that. We're not going to sort of create one common database to rule them all, but we're going to create a map that says, here are these various vegetation plot data sets. And the last one I want to go through is just our zoology program core highlights. In zoology, in order to get stuff done in botany, and because of the limitations, we sort of cut it back right to what our partners essentially need. So things like species that are listed under the Endangered Species Act, we focused on that data alone. So 26,280 observation records is nowhere near a record for us. It's a pretty dismally low data side of things, but we focused on what was most important to our partners. We did add 73,000 survey locations. Over 3,000 photos are now displaying for 205 vertebrate and 36 invertebrate species. So again, bringing those species accounts to life. We updated range maps for 133 species. And then a major focus of the zoology program has been on sort of a train wreck that's going to happen whether we like it or not, and that's white nose syndrome. White nose syndrome is a fungus that affects bat species. Started back here in New York and has spread across the country, skipped over a bunch of the western states out to the coast. We expect that we will detect it sometime this winter or next spring. And so we've done things like all of these gray dots. This is Fort Peck Lake and Sydney, North Dakota border area. And these are models for northern Myotis bat. Orange is predicted to be moderately suitable habitat, and yellow low, and the purple is just its range polygon. This is a federally listed species that we've really greatly expanded our knowledge of in the state. And again, I want to kind of focus on those gray dots. Those are all survey locations. So we've really ramped up our survey effort. Dan Bakken, our senior zoologist this year, produced 93 different reports from our long-term acoustic monitoring efforts, which was a huge ask. So we want to do in the coming year for zoology, we want to update systematically our conservation status ranks, and we've been ramping up to do that. The predictive modeling will help with that. We want to work on a more complete taxonomic representation for invertebrate species. Again, it's going to take us several careers to do that. And then because of all the bat work and the interest from our bat or our agency partners, we want to put out like a monograph like we did a number of years ago for amphibians and reptiles for bats. And it'll summarize all that in one publication for all agency partners. Okay, that's what I wanted to tell you.
It's really impressive.
Yeah, it really is.
Bryce, is there any way to measure any kind of margin of error on the predictive models?
Yeah, we assess each of the models in terms of how well they're fitting the data. Absolutely.
That's probably different for different. I mean, it's not one consistent way to do it necessarily. Or
Well, we have a standard approach. Each one of those models is associated with roughly a 16-page write-up. So there's a lot of background and meat to the models. We've automated the process so that once we have the data in place and it's high quality data and it's ensured that it's high quality and ready for modeling, at that point we could probably, the human time that's involved is about a half an hour. Just for reference, when I first started that, we're on generation 3 of our modeling effort. The first generation, I could maybe model two species in a day, like really going at it, 12-hour day. And now we could do, a species in half hour because of automation. So,
any effects from the administrative decision the other day on Endangered Species Act? I mean, I realize it's going to be in courts and other things, but
no impact immediately on us. It'll just be ride the wave, surf the wave. I've told people, like, you just got to enjoy surfing the wave. Don't worry about things. Just you got to enjoy the ride. So, yeah.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Great.
Thanks for your time.
So we're going to invite Tommy, or
I'm going to
yes.
interrupt. Sorry. Thank you all for your flexibility today. We have Tommy that we want to get to in just a few minutes, but we have one other action item that I think is brief. That's the pilot project that Joe has been working on, and Gail Bacon came from Belgrade to talk about that, and she has to leave for a finance committee meeting, and I don't think if we have Tommy's presentation will allow time for Gail to join us. So if we could move up that action item now, that would accommodate Gail, and then we could move into Tommy.
Okay.
And I know lunch is here, so I don't know if people want to help themselves to lunch, or if I want to keep going.
Well, I want to be able to provide you guys with some comfort. I also want to keep going, so maybe we can just take a small break to gather our lunch and then to eat while we're listening. Okay, so about a 15-minute break to gather lunch and take a small break. And I'm sorry,
or even less.
Yeah,
if we could go fast. Gail has to leave, she said, no later than 12:45.
Okay.